The senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me first ask unanimous consent that the pending quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
And then ask unanimous consent that Patrick Riley, a fellow in my office, be granted floor privileges for the remainder of the Congress.
Without objection.
Mr. President, Republicans in Congress have been on the warpath for a long time to repeal the Affordable Care Act. In fact, in this new Congress, their first order of business has been to pave the way for dismantling this law, despite the fact that 20 million Americans have gained health insurance coverage thanks to this law, despite people no longer being denied coverage for pre-existing conditions, despite big savings in health care costs, and despite everyone with insurance being able to access important preventive health services for free, my Republican colleagues have decided to repeal it. And they have, after 7 years to get ready, no replacement. Not even a path to a replacement at this point. Yes, they are set on repealing a law that has provided both health and financial security to millions of Americans with no replacement in sight, just at this point, some empty IOU for some future piece of legislation that may or may not be any good. It's a little like being asked to jump out of an airplane with no parachute and being told, trust us, we'll build the parachute for you before you hit the ground. We don't know what this non-existent Republican replacement would look like, but we sure do know what a repeal would do. It would gut health insurance premium tax credits that help millions of Americans obtain health insurance they could not otherwise afford. It would unwind an expansion of the Medicaid program that covers millions more Americans in some 30 states that have chosen to participate, casting tens of millions of Americans, men, women, and children, out of their health insurance. At the same time, it would deliver an enormous tax boon to millionaires and billionaires, as usual for Republicans, by repealing the revenue we use to pay for Obamacare. This tax boon is a 16% reduction in the taxes owed by millionaires and billionaires on their investment income. So Republicans want to take health insurance away from tens of millions of ordinary Americans and simultaneously reward those at the very top of the income pile with a big, big tax benefit. So much for all the talk we've heard from Republicans about the deficit. At least in Rhode Island, the Affordable Care Act is working. The law launched accountable care organizations that are improving care while lowering cost. In Rhode Island, Coastal Medical and Integra Community Care Network, two primary care-focused ACOs, are not only driving down per-person health expenditures, but achieving high marks on quality and on patient experience. In total, Coastal has saved $24 million over 3 years, and Integra has saved $4 million in its first year as an ACO. The Affordable Care Act also protected seniors from the dreaded drug price donut hole. And I can tell you, I heard a lot about the donut hole from seniors in Rhode Island when I was running for the Senate. The Affordable Care Act has protected families where someone has a chronic condition and couldn't get insurance. And the Affordable Care Act has prevented insurers from throwing customers off coverage when they got sick. It is true that some of the health insurance exchanges haven't attracted enough competition. We can fix that. Indeed, to help with that issue, Senators Brown, Franken, and I are today introducing the Consumer Health Options and Insurance Competition Enhancement Act, or the CHOICE Act, to add a public health insurance option to the health insurance exchanges. This public option would guarantee that consumers always have an affordable, high-quality option when shopping for health insurance, and a strong health care fallback when markets fail. Obamacare may not be perfect, but it's done an awful lot of good. Millions of Americans who lacked insurance now have it, and the rate of uninsured Americans has fallen to 8.6%, about half of what it was in 2010. Projected federal health care costs are down nearly $3 trillion. Instead of demolishing a system that works well for millions of Americans with no replacement on the horizon, let's use our proposal here to make it better. Let's add a public option to our health insurance exchanges. I thank the chair. Mr. President, if I could address another topic now and ask unanimous consent to speak for up to 15 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection.
The question that I bring to the floor today, Mr. President, is what is Scott Pruitt hiding? Last week, the Environment and Public Works Committee held a hearing on President Trump's nominee to the Environmental Protection Agency. Today, for my 155th Time to Wake Up speech, I've got unanswered questions about Mr. Pruitt's fitness for that role. His evasiveness at his hearing signaled nothing good about his ties to the industry he would regulate if confirmed. And the lack of curiosity about these industry ties from my Republican colleagues speaks volumes about the political clout of that industry. One question stood out. Our new chairman, Senator Barrasso, posed the standard question of nominees to Mr. Pruitt in our hearing. Do you know of any matters which you may or may not have disclosed that might place you in any conflict of interest if you are confirmed? Mr. Pruitt answered, no. Well, Mr. President, Scott Pruitt crawls with conflict of interest. He has conflicts of interest with the fossil fuel industry from his political fundraising. We just don't know how bad. He likely has conflicts of interest from confidential private meetings with fossil fuel companies at Republican Attorneys General Association get-togethers, but we just don't know how bad. And there's almost certainly evidence of conflicts of interest in his undisclosed emails with fossil fuel companies. But again, we just don't know how bad. He came clean on none of this in his confirmation hearing. This chart is a simple and a likely incomplete representation of the many financial links reported between Pruitt and the fossil fuel industry. At the top are the companies and the entities that have supported Mr. Pruitt with political funding. Down below are the political organizations for which he has raised money. Pruitt for Attorney General was his re-election campaign. The polluters gave to Pruitt for Attorney General. Oklahoma Strong PAC was his leadership PAC, a separate political fundraising vehicle. The polluters gave to Oklahoma Strong. There was another one here called Liberty 2.0, Mr. Pruitt's super PAC, but he closed it down, so we don't list it. But while it existed, his super PAC took nearly $200,000 in fossil fuel industry contributions. Mr. Pruitt served as the chair of the Republican Attorney Generals Association in 2012 and 2013 and was a member of RAGA's executive committee through 2015. Between 2014 and 2016, RAGA received $530,000 from Koch Industries. It received $350,000 from Murray Energy. It received $160,000 from ExxonMobil. And it received $125,000 from Devon Energy. Devon Energy, by the way, is the company whose letter Mr. Pruitt transposed virtually verbatim onto his official letterhead to send to the EPA as the official position of the Oklahoma Attorney General. During his hearing, Pruitt refused to provide details about any solicitations he made from regulated industries for the Republican Attorney Generals Association. We know they got special attention from RAGA. Here is a confidential 2015 meeting agenda from RAGA when Pruitt was on its executive committee. I ask unanimous consent to enter the meeting agenda page into the record.
Without objection.
This confidential agenda mentions a private meeting with Murray Energy. It mentions a private meeting with Southern Company. And it mentions a private meeting with American fuel petrochemical manufacturers, which represents a lot of these characters. Murray Energy, of course, is right there. Southern Company is right there. And the Fuel Petrochemical Organization, I'm sure, represents the others. But this confidential meeting agenda is all we have about what took place in those private meetings. I asked Mr. Pruitt in our hearings about the content of these private meetings, and he wouldn't answer any questions. He didn't want us to know what was discussed there with the big fossil fuel polluters, companies whose pollution he will oversee as EPA administrator. Pruitt was also a chairman of the Rule of Law Defense Fund. The so-called Rule of Law Defense Fund is a dark money political operation that launders the identity of donors giving money to the Republican Attorneys General Association. As the New York Times said, the fund is, and I quote them here, a legal entity that allows companies benefiting from the actions of Mr. Pruitt and other Republican attorneys general to make anonymous donations in unlimited amounts. It is a complete black hole of political cash. In the hearing, Pruitt refused to shine any light into the dark money he solicited or received from these fossil fuel polluters or others for the Rule of Law Defense Fund. Not who he asked for money, not who gave money, not what they gave, nothing. This is an organization that appears to have $1 million a year budget. So someone was busy raising a lot of money. How much exactly? From whom? And what was the deal? Scott Pruitt doesn't want our committee or this Senate or the American people to know. Colleagues and I sent letters to the Office of Government Ethics and to the Environmental Protection Agency's top ethics official. Their responses indicate that their ethics rules predate Citizens United and its torrent of dark political money. Their regulatory authority on government ethics has not caught up with the post-Citizens United dark money world. Since their ethics authorities have not been updated for these dark money conflicts, then if Pruitt doesn't disclose any of this information before the Senate, no one will know. And even those government ethics watchdogs may end up blind to conflicts of interest. That doesn't mean there isn't a conflict of interest here. What it means is it's a hidden conflict of interest. And that makes it our duty in the Senate to examine those relationships, except for the fact that the fossil fuel industry now more or less runs the Republican Party, so there is a scrupulous lack of interest in this fossil fuel industry dark money. How badly does Mr. Pruitt want to hide his dealings with his fossil fuel patrons? An Open Records Act request was filed with the Oklahoma Attorney General's office, Mr. Pruitt's office, for emails with energy firms, fossil fuel trade groups, and their political arms, with companies like Devon Energy and Murray Energy and Koch Industries and the American Petroleum Institute, which is the industry's trade association. Let me share 3 facts about this Open Records inquiry. 1, the Open Records Act request was filed more than 745 days ago. Over 2 years, Mr. President. 2 years. 2, Pruitt's office has admitted that there are at least 3,000 responsive documents to that Open Records Act request. Just consider that fact alone for a moment. There were 3,000 emails and other documents between his office and these fossil fuel companies and front groups. 3,000! And zero. Exactly zero of those documents have been produced. 745 days, 3,000 documents, zero produced. Just think how smelly those 3,000 emails must be when he'd rather have this flagrant open records compliance failure than have any of those 3,000 emails see the light of day. Given the important financial interests of these groups before the EPA, do we really not think that 3,000 emails back and forth between him and his office and those groups might be relevant to his conflicts of interest as administrator? Until very recently, Republicans had a keen interest in emails. Chairman Barrasso asked that important question. Do you know of any matters which you may or may not have disclosed that might place you in any conflict of interest if you are confirmed? Scott Pruitt answered, no. On this record, there is every reason to believe that his statement is false. Might having raised significant dark money from the industry he would regulate create a conflict of interest? Let's say he made a call to Devon Energy and said, hey, I slapped your letter on my letterhead and turned it in as if it was the official work of the Oklahoma Attorney General's office. Now I need $1 million, and you can give it to the Rule of Law Defense Fund as dark money without anyone knowing that it was you. Might such a quid pro quo create a conflict of interest in his ability to carry out the duties of EPA administrator in matters affecting Devon Energy? Impossible to say that it would not be a conflict of interest. Let's say that at those confidential private meetings with Murray Energy and Southern Company, that something went on. Might something that takes place in private meetings with big energy interests that he's going to have to regulate create a possible conflict of interest? They paid to be there. They wanted something. Might that not give rise to a conflict of interest? And who knows what conflicts of interest would be divulged if his office were not sitting on 3,000 undisclosed emails with fossil fuel industries that he will be regulating as EPA administrator. I challenge anyone to come to the Senate floor and tell me with a straight face that there is nothing that those emails could reveal that might create a conflict of interest for the man discharged with regulating the companies on the other end of those emails. Mr. President, no just doesn't cut it as an answer from Mr. Pruitt when there is still so much that he is hiding. I yield the floor.